6 hours. That was all Nora Whitlock had left before the hospital canceled the surgery, and her mother officially embarked on a journey of no return. No bank agreed, no relatives answered the phone. As she tremblingly signed the discharge papers, the hospital manager whispered, "All expenses paid. Anonymous." Outside the window, a convoy of sleek black cars, silent as mobile coffins. And in the first car, a man sat upright, looking directly into her eyes. No words needed to make her understand that her life had just belonged to him. If you enjoy stories of sacrifice, secrets, and love born from danger, please like. And comment the city you're viewing so I know how far my story has come. And don't leave, because what happens next will change everything you think you know about Nora Whitlock. The fluorescent lights in the hallway of Creston General Hospital had been flickering for 3 days. Nobody fixed them. The maintenance crew was short-staffed, the administrator had said last Tuesday. Nora had stopped noticing by Wednesday. By Thursday morning, she had stopped noticing most things. The cold of the plastic chair beneath her, the smell of antiseptic that had worked its way into her hair, the low mechanical hum of the elevator down the hall that opened and closed every few minutes with nobody getting out. What she noticed was the number. $347,000. It sat at the top of the billing statement like a verdict, clean font, neat columns, the kind of document that looked almost reasonable until you actually read it. Nora folded the paper exactly once and pressed it flat against her knee. Her hands weren't shaking. She was proud of that. She had been awake for 31 hours and her eyes felt like they'd been packed with sand, but her hands were completely still and she focused on that. One thing at a time. The elevator opened. Nobody got out. She had called 6 banks in the past 4 days. She had called 2 credit unions. She had called her Uncle Dale in Portland, who hadn't picked up, and her cousin Marcus in Atlanta, who picked up on the first ring, listened to the first 20 seconds of what she was saying, and told her he was sorry, but he was dealing with his own situation right now, which he did not specify. She had applied for 3 emergency medical loan programs. 2 had rejected her before she even finished the application. The 3rd had put her on a waiting list and sent her an automated email wishing her the best. Her mother, Ellen Whitlock, was 53 years old. She had worked as a school cafeteria manager for 22 years. She had a heart defect that had gone undiagnosed until 6 weeks ago when she'd collapsed in a grocery store parking lot and a teenager had called an ambulance. Without the surgery, a complex valve replacement the cardiologist described with careful precision as the only available option, Ellen would not survive the next 3 months. With it, the doctor had said, she had an excellent prognosis. The word excellent had echoed inside Nora's skull for 6 weeks. The billing office was on the 2nd floor. Sandra at the desk had been kind the first 2 visits. By the 5th visit, her kindness had acquired a quality that reminded Nora of wet paper, something that appeared solid until you pressed against it and it gave way completely. Sandra had explained 3 times now that the hospital policy was clear, that charity care applications had a processing window, that unfortunately the surgery was scheduled, and if payment arrangements were not confirmed by 11 o'clock this morning, the slot would need to be released. It was 7:42. Nora stood up. She walked to the elevator. She pressed the button for the 2nd floor and rode it in silence, and walked through the door marked Patient Financial Services and sat down across from Sandra, who looked up with an expression Nora had memorized at this point. Tired sympathy, professionally maintained, already calculating the shortest path to the conversation's end. "Miss Whitlock, I need more time. I understand that 2 more days. I'm waiting on an emergency assistance program. They told me the waiting period for those programs is typically 3 to 4 weeks. Sandra's voice was not unkind. It was simply finished. I want to help you, but the scheduling coordinator has already pushed this twice. If we release the slot today, the surgeon's next availability is— Don't tell me, Nora said. Sandra stopped. Don't tell me his next availability. Nora's voice was very quiet. Because I already know that my mother won't make it that long, and if you say it out loud, I'm going to have to— She stopped. Her jaw tightened. I'm going to need to sign something. Sandra was quiet for a moment. Her eyes moved to her screen and back. The discharge paperwork. Yes. The form was 2 pages. Nora signed both. Her handwriting was neat and even. She had always had good handwriting. Her mother used to say she should have been a doctor just based on the handwriting alone, because it seemed like a waste. Sandra reached across the desk and took the pages and said she was very sorry. Nora said thank you and stood up and walked out. She made it to the end of the hallway before she stopped walking. There was a window at the end, floor to ceiling, looking out over the hospital's east parking structure. She stood in front of it with her arms crossed and her forehead almost touching the glass and breathed. In, out, slow. There was a script she had used on herself for the past 6 weeks whenever the panic got too close. It was not a particularly sophisticated script. It was basically just a list. You are still standing, you are still thinking, what is the next step? The script had stopped working 3 days ago, but she kept running it anyway because the alternative was to stop running it, and she had no idea what happened after that. The next step was... Her phone buzzed. She looked at it. The number was local. She answered because she answered every call now, had been answering every unknown number for 6 weeks. Because any one of them might be a program. A loan officer. Someone who'd found a path she hadn't seen yet. Ms. Whitlock. A man's voice. Smooth and measured, like someone who had learned a long time ago that volume was unnecessary. My name isn't important. What is important is that I'm calling to inform you that your mother's surgical balance at Creston General has been settled in full this morning. Nora didn't move. The procedure is confirmed to proceed as scheduled. You don't need to do anything further at the hospital today except authorize the surgery. The glass was cold against her forehead. Who is this? She said. Someone who'd like to meet you. There's a car waiting at the main entrance, black SUV, front row. The driver's name is Kyle. He won't cause you any trouble. The line went dead. She stood there for 11 seconds. She counted them. Then she turned and walked back to Sandra's office and asked her to look up the current balance on Ellen Whitlock's account. And Sandra looked at her screen and something shifted in her expression. Not quite surprise, something past surprise. And she said the balance read 0 and the surgery was confirmed for 1 o'clock and the preoperative team would be ready to receive the patient at 11:30. Nora said thank you. She walked to the elevator. She rode it to the ground floor. She walked through the main lobby past the information desk and through the sliding glass doors and stopped on the sidewalk in the thin October light. The parking row directly in front of the entrance held 4 vehicles. 3 of them were ordinary. The 4th was a black SUV with clean windows and no plates visible from the front. A man stood beside the passenger door. He was very large, mid-40s, with the kind of stillness that didn't come from calm but from practice. He was not holding anything. He was not making any gesture. He was simply standing there and watching her with a patient, neutral expression. She walked toward him. He opened the rear door without speaking. The interior smelled like leather and something faintly chemical. Clean air, the kind that gets recirculated through serious filtration systems. The seats were black. The windows were tinted. In the seat directly across from the rear-facing partition sat a man she had never seen before. He was younger than she had imagined, somewhere in his mid-30s. Dark jacket, no tie. He had the kind of face that might be considered attractive if it weren't so completely still. Not relaxed, still, the way a blade is still before it moves. His eyes were dark and steady, and they moved to her immediately and stayed there with a directness that most people would have flinched from. He did not speak immediately. He let her get settled. The door closed. The car didn't move. Miss Whitlock, he said. His voice matched the one from the phone. Controlled. Not unkind. Why? She said. He tilted his head slightly. Why did you pay it? She said. I don't know you. You don't know me. That's $347,000, and I need to understand why before this conversation goes any further. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, because I needed something, and you were available. What does that mean? I need a personal assistant, someone with your skill set. Nora looked at him carefully. My skill set. Your employment history is thorough. 3 years coordinating logistics for a mid-sized distribution company. Before that, 2 years in financial records management. You're organized, you're fast, you don't make the same mistake twice, and you operate well under pressure. A pause. The hospital situation confirms the last part. You researched me. Yes. Before paying. Yes. She absorbed that. The car still hadn't moved. Outside the tinted window, the hospital entrance was a smear of gray and beige. She thought about her mother's face the night before, the way Ellen had held Nora's hand and told her to stop worrying, that it would work out, her voice thin from medication and exhaustion, and something that had tried very hard to be hope. "How long?" Nora said. "1 year." "Doing what exactly?" "Scheduling, logistics, document management, accompanying me to meetings." He paused. "Some of those meetings will be complicated." "Complicated?" "Yes." "That's not an answer." "No," he agreed. "It's not." He shifted slightly in his seat. "My name is Damien Viscari. You may have heard it." She had heard it, twice. Once 2 years ago in a news article she'd scrolled past about a federal investigation that had apparently gone nowhere. And once more recently in a conversation at her previous job where two senior managers had gone quiet and changed the subject in a way that told you everything you needed to know about the subject. She hadn't looked into it further at the time because it hadn't been relevant to her life. It was relevant now. "I know what you're thinking," he said. "I doubt that. You're thinking about whether the surgery is actually confirmed or whether that goes away if you say no." She held his gaze. "Is it? The payment is processed. It doesn't reverse regardless of what you decide in the next 3 minutes." He said it flatly, like someone reading a factual statement. "I need you to understand that because I want your answer to be an actual answer, not a transaction made out of fear." Nora was quiet. Outside, a nurse walked past the window pushing a cart. Ordinary. The world was moving at its ordinary pace on the other side of the glass. "You're asking me to work for a criminal organization," she said. "I'm asking you to work for me, directly, as my personal assistant." That's not an answer either. Something moved briefly in his expression, not quite amusement, something close to it, and then gone. "No, it's not." She looked at her hands in her lap. They still weren't shaking. She concentrated on that for one more second, then looked back up at him. "What happens after the year?" "You walk away. No debt, no obligation. I have no interest in coercion as a long-term strategy. It's inefficient." He paused. "You'll be compensated. Not extravagantly, but fairly. Housing and transportation provided. Your mother's follow-up care costs are covered for the duration." Nora's jaw tightened at that last part, because it was precise, because it found exactly the right pressure point and applied exactly enough force, and she had no idea whether that was calculated or simply accurate, and she wasn't sure the difference mattered. "I'd need—" "You have 3 minutes," he said. "I told you that. I need to know I can check on her." "You can." "Not a supervised." "You can see her freely, within reasonable scheduling constraints." Nora looked at him for a long moment. He looked back. The car was very quiet. The filtration system breathed in the background, low, steady, white noise. She thought about Ellen saying it would work out. She thought about Sandra's face when she'd looked at the screen. She thought about 31 hours without sleep and 6 banks and the automated email wishing her the best. 1 year, Nora said. 1 year. And I walk away after. Yes. She nodded once, short, final. Okay. Damien Vescari looked at her for another moment and then turned his gaze to the window and said one quiet word to the driver, and the black SUV pulled smoothly out of the hospital parking lot and into traffic. Nora didn't look back at the building. She told herself that was because looking back was useless. She almost believed it. The estate was 40 minutes outside the city, set back from a private road behind a gate that required 3 separate clearances to open. The grounds were large and quiet. Mature trees, a stone perimeter wall, no decorative flourishes of any kind. It looked less like wealth and more like a decision. Like someone had looked at a piece of land and thought, this can be defended. Her room was on the 3rd floor of the main house, clean, functional, a window that looked out over the east garden. A laptop and a tablet on the desk, already logged into a secure system she didn't have the credentials for yet. A small wardrobe of professional clothing in her size, and a simple white card on the nightstand that said, 6 a.m., Damien's office, 1st floor, east wing. She stood in the middle of the room for a moment. Then she went to the bathroom, ran cold water over her face, looked at herself in the mirror. There was a version of herself she had maintained for 6 weeks, functional, persistent, one step ahead of collapsing, and she could see it starting to fracture at the edges now that the immediate crisis had resolved. Her eyes were red, her skin was pulled tight. She looked like someone who had spent a month underwater. She gripped the edge of the sink. 1 year, 52 weeks, 365 days. And then she went back to the room, lay down on top of the covers, fully dressed, and was asleep in under 2 minutes. The next morning, she found the office without getting lost, which she considered a minor personal victory given the size of the house. It was a large room, dark wood, 2 walls of filing systems and 1 wall of monitors. Damien was already at his desk when she arrived at 5:58. He didn't comment on the time. He handed her a tablet with a 2-page brief on it. The brief outlined her primary responsibilities in bullet points: scheduling, communication management, document organization, accompaniment to external meetings. Beside each bullet point was a security clearance designation. 3 of the 12 items had a designation she didn't recognize. "What's Delta Tier?" she said. "You'll be briefed when relevant." She looked up from the tablet. "That's not how I work." He looked back at her. The expression on his face was genuinely neutral. Not defensive, not annoyed, just waiting. "I can't do this job if I'm getting information in pieces," she said. "If I don't know the full picture, I'll make wrong decisions. That creates problems for both of us." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Delta Tier refers to meetings with representatives from organizations I have contractual arrangements with that are not legally registered businesses." Nora held his gaze. "Criminal organizations?" "Yes. And I'll be in those meetings. You'll be in the room. You won't be speaking." "What will I be doing?" "Observing, documenting." A pause. "And making sure I don't miss things." She looked at the tablet again, then she set it down on the corner of his desk and clasped her hands in front of her. "I need to know 2 things before we start." He waited. "First, if something happens to me during one of those meetings, something that isn't part of the plan, what's the protocol?" "You'll have a protection detail at all external locations. If something escalates beyond that detail's capacity, there are secondary protocols. You will be briefed on exit procedures before any Delta Tier meeting. Second," she paused, "who else in this house knows why I'm here?" Something shifted in his expression. Not much. A fraction. "Cale, who picked you up. My head of security, whose name is Vern. No one else in the household staff knows the arrangement." "Good," she said. "I'd like to keep it that way." He looked at her for a moment and then nodded once and said, "Start with the Thursday files. The access code is on the tablet." She picked up the tablet. She found the Thursday files. She started working. The first 2 weeks were data, schedules, correspondence logs, financial reports organized under corporate names that sounded legitimate until you looked at the transaction patterns, at which point they stopped sounding legitimate almost immediately. Nora had spent 2 years in financial records management. She knew what normal looked like. She cataloged what wasn't normal with a color-coding system she developed herself and presented to Damien on day 12. He looked at it for 4 minutes without speaking. "You developed this yourself," he said. "The existing system had gaps." "I can see that." He looked at it again. "What made you use 4 tiers instead of 3? "The 3rd tier had overlap issues. 4 tiers resolved them." He nodded slowly. Then he said, "Show Vern this tomorrow. He handles security cross-referencing. If the 2 systems can communicate, it'll reduce redundancy." It wasn't praise exactly. It was more like professional acknowledgement, the kind you get from someone who notices competence the way other people notice weather, as a practical fact about the environment. She took that and moved forward. Vern was 51 and built like a door, and had the communication style of someone who had been burned by trust too many times to distribute it casually. He looked at her color-coded system with the expression of a man expecting to find something wrong with it, and then couldn't, and that seemed to irritate him slightly, which Nora read as progress. By week 3, she was in her first external meeting. It was a dinner at a private restaurant in a room with no windows. 4 men on the other side of the table. Damien on her side with 2 of his associates. She sat at the far end with a small notebook and wrote down nothing that anyone said because the room was clearly being swept for recording devices every half hour. And she wasn't foolish, but she watched the men across the table with the systematic attention she usually reserved for financial documents. And by the end of the dinner, she had filled 6 pages of a mental ledger she would transfer to actual paper in the car on the way back. In the car, Damien looked at her. "The one in the gray jacket," she said before he could ask. He deferred to the one on the left every time a number came up. That's not the hierarchy they presented. A pause. Also, the second man checked his phone 4 times during the part of the conversation about the warehouse transfer. Twice he typed something, short messages. Both times he angled it so the man beside him couldn't see the screen. Damien looked at her for a long moment. "Anything else?" he said. The gray jacket man's collar was damp when he stood up. He wasn't nervous about the dinner. He was nervous about something the dinner was going to cause. The car was very quiet. "You noticed all of that," Damien said, while appearing to look at your notebook. "I always appear to look at my notebook," she said. He was quiet for another moment. Then he turned to the window, and she could not see his expression, only the line of his jaw and the passing streetlights. "Good," he said quietly, to no one in particular. Nora looked down at the blank page of her notebook and said nothing, and felt, for the first time in 3 weeks, something that was not quite steady, but was close to it. A feeling like the ground was beneath her feet, even if the ground itself was somewhere she had never planned to stand. The car moved through the dark city, and she did not think about how many days remained in the year. She thought about the man in the gray jacket and what he'd been typing. She thought about the warehouse transfer and the hierarchy that didn't match the introduction. She thought about the fact that Damien had said good the way someone says it when they mean more than the word. She almost let herself file that under things that don't matter. Almost. But 3 miles from the estate, her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She answered it on the second ring out of habit, and what she heard on the other end of the line made the almost steady feeling dissolve completely. A voice she did not recognize, low and unhurried, saying her full name and her mother's hospital room number, and telling her to think very carefully before her next report to Damien Viscari, because some information, it said, was worth more than a year of loyalty. The line went dead. Nora sat very still in the moving car. Damien was looking out the window. He hadn't heard it. She put the phone back in her jacket pocket and stared at the seat in front of her and thought, someone inside this organization already knows who she is, and they are not Damien's friend. She lay on top of the covers the same way she had on the first night, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling. But this time it wasn't exhaustion pulling her under. It was the voice on the phone playing on a loop inside her skull. Low and unhurried, like someone reading from a list. Her name. Her mother's room number, the specific number, 412, which meant whoever it was hadn't just looked up Ellen Whitlock in a hospital database. They had people inside Creston General, or they had someone who did. She turned that over for 3 hours. At 2 in the morning, she sat up, turned on the desk lamp, and opened the tablet Damien had given her. She went into the scheduling system and pulled the full log of everyone who had accessed her personnel file since she'd arrived at the estate. Damien, Vern, one other designation she didn't recognize. A user tag coded as FIN7. She stared at FIN7 for a long time. Then she closed the tablet, turned off the lamp, and lay back down. She did not tell Damien in the morning. She told herself it was because she needed more information first, that acting on a phone call with no corroborating data was exactly how you made the wrong move. She was good at building cases before she presented them. That was the rational explanation, and she held on to it with both hands because the other explanation, that she didn't yet know who in this house she could trust, was too large to hold comfortably. Morning briefing was at 6 as usual. Damien was at his desk already. He had a habit of being at his desk before anyone else arrived that she'd stopped trying to interpret and simply accepted as a feature of him, the way you accept weather. He had 3 files open on the left monitor and a phone to his ear. He held up one finger when she walked in. "Wait." And she sat in the chair across from the desk and waited. The call lasted 4 minutes. He said almost nothing on his end. 2 or 3 one-word responses. When he set the phone down, his expression had not changed, but something had shifted in the atmosphere of the room. A slight pressure drop, the kind you feel before something breaks. "Change of schedule, Tom," he said. "Wednesday's meeting moves to today, 2 o'clock. "Which meeting?" "Harlan Cole." Nora kept her face neutral. She had processed Harlan Cole's file 3 days ago. He was, on paper, a commercial real estate developer with offices in 3 cities. Below the paper, he was the operational head of a distribution network that intersected with Damien's organization at 4 specific points, all of them financial. The file had flagged 2 anomalies she'd noted in her color-coded system and hadn't yet reported because she was still verifying. "I need 2 hours to prep the documentation," she said. "You have 90 minutes. She stood. "I'll need FIN7's access cleared. I can't cross-reference the Cole accounts without it." Damien looked at her. It was a specific kind of look, not suspicious, evaluating, like a man checking whether a door is load-bearing before he leans on it. "FIN7 is my financial advisor's access node," he said. "Marcus Reeve. He handles the structural accounts." "I know who it is," she said, which was not entirely true. She had known the code, not the name, but she held his gaze and he let it pass. "I'll have it cleared by 7:30, he said. "Thank you." She turned toward the door. "Nora?" She stopped. "The Cole meeting has a specific friction point. Last quarter's wire reconciliation. There's a 40,000 discrepancy that Cole's team is going to raise." He paused. "I need you to have the documentation ready to show that discrepancy originated on his end." She turned back. "Does it?" The room was very quiet. "Yes," Damien said. His voice was flat and completely certain. "It does." She looked at him for one more second and then nodded and left. In 90 minutes, she built the cleanest brief she'd ever assembled. 6 pages, cross-referenced. The 40,000 discrepancy traced through 4 transaction layers back to a Cole-side processing error in August. It was real. The documentation was real. She'd checked it 3 times because she needed it to be real, and it was. And that was the first thing that morning that had felt solid. The second thing was finding, while inside FIN7's access, a secondary ledger notation that didn't belong. It was small. A single line in a reconciliation file dated 6 weeks ago, before Nora had arrived, flagging a transfer that matched no corresponding account in the main system. $42,000. Marked internal adjustment. No signature, no counter-authorization. She took a screenshot on her personal phone, which she was not supposed to use on the secure system, and then she closed the file and went back to the Cole brief and told herself she would deal with it after the meeting. Harlan Cole arrived at 1:58 with 2 men she'd never seen, and a lawyer whose face had the particular blankness of someone paid to witness things without reacting to them. He was 50s, thick through the shoulders, with a handshake like a statement of intent, and eyes that moved around the room cataloging everything before he sat down. He looked at Nora once when she came in behind Damien. A flat, assessing look, the kind men like Cole gave to unknown variables. Then he looked away, and she became furniture in his mind, which was exactly what she needed. She sat at the side table with her documentation and her notebook and said nothing. The first 20 minutes were routine, pleasantries with edges, status updates on 3 shared interests. Cole's lawyer passed a summary document across the table, and Vern intercepted it, checked it, passed it to Damien, who read it without expression. Then Cole said, "The August reconciliation." Damien set down the document. "What about it?" 40,000 short on the wire. My team's been waiting 3 months for an explanation." "Your team," Damien said, "made an input error on the processing date. It's documented." Cole's jaw moved. "That's not the finding on our end." "I'm sure it isn't." Damien looked at Nora. She opened the brief and passed it across. Cole's lawyer took it, spent 40 seconds reading the first 2 pages, and then passed it to Cole, who spent another 30 seconds on it before setting it down. His face had not changed, but one of the men behind him shifted his weight slightly, which was information. "This documentation was prepared," Cole started. "This morning," Nora said. Cole looked at her, directly this time. Not furniture anymore. "From your original August processing logs," she continued, keeping her voice level, "the error is on line 47 of the secondary transfer sheet. Your code, your timestamp." She paused. "If you'd like, I can walk through the trace sequence." A silence. Cole looked at Damien. "She's your assistant." "Yes," Damien said. "When did you—" "Recently." Damien's voice had no particular quality. The documentation is accurate. The discrepancy originated on your end. I'd like that acknowledged before we proceed. Cole looked at the brief again. Then he looked at Nora again. It was a different kind of look this time, still calculating but with something else underneath it. A small, specific alarm, barely visible, the kind a man tries to suppress and doesn't quite manage. Acknowledged, he said finally. Flat, controlled. The meeting moved forward. On the ride back, Vern was in the front. Damien was beside her in the rear. He was looking at something on his phone and she was looking out the window, and the city was moving past in the early afternoon light, and she decided she was going to tell him about the phone call. Not the ledger notation. The phone call. She had been carrying it for 16 hours, and she needed to put it down somewhere, and the only place available was across from her in a black suit, looking at his phone. Last night, she said. In the car, after the dinner. He looked up from the phone. I got a call. Unknown number. She kept her voice even. They knew my name and my mother's room number at Creston General. They told me to think carefully before my next report to you. The car was completely quiet. Even the road noise seemed to dim. Word for word, Damien said. Think very carefully before your next report to Damien Vescari, because some information is worth more than a year of loyalty. He looked at her for a long time. Then he looked at the back of Vern's head. Vern. Heard it, Vern said from the front. His voice was very controlled. Route change. Take us to the secondary office. Copy. Damien put his phone away. He looked at Nora again. You waited 16 hours. I needed to think. You needed to think, he repeated. Not mocking, something harder than that. Someone threatens your mother's location, and you sit on it for 16 hours. They didn't threaten her, Nora said. They threatened my loyalty to you. Those aren't the same thing. He was quiet. And I needed to know if the call was connected to something I found this morning, in FIN7's access. She paused. A ledger notation, $42,000. Internal adjustment, no counter authorization. 6 weeks ago. The expression on Damien's face shifted. It was the most movement she'd seen on it since she'd arrived. Not anger, something more controlled than anger, and for that reason more alarming. Show me, he said. She showed him the screenshot on her personal phone. He looked at it for a long time without speaking. Then he looked out the window. You used your personal phone on the secure system, he said. Yes. That's a protocol violation. I know. Don't do it again. Okay, she said. He didn't say anything else about it. The secondary office was a floor in a building downtown that looked like an insurance company and functioned as Damien's operational nerve center when the estate wasn't appropriate, which meant when things were moving too fast to be contained by distance. It had 8 rooms, 12 people, and a communications setup that Nora suspected cost more than most hospitals. Vern pulled Marcus Reeve in within 20 minutes of arrival. Nora had not yet met Marcus Reeve in person. He was 60, slight, with the careful posture of a man who had learned to take up minimal space in rooms where other people held authority. He wore reading glasses pushed up on his head, and he had the fingers of someone who had spent 40 years moving money around on paper. Thin, precise, always slightly in motion even when the rest of him was still. He walked into the conference room and saw Nora, and then looked at Damien, and something happened in his face that was very fast and very controlled, a flicker that lasted less than a second before the professional composure came back down. But she saw it. She filed it. Damien, he said, calm. What's the situation? Sit down, Marcus. He sat. He folded his hands on the table. He looked at Damien with the patient, steady expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and knew how to wait them out. Damien slid a tablet across the table with the screenshot pulled up. Marcus looked at it. He looked at it for exactly the right amount of time, not too fast, which would suggest recognition, not too slow, which would suggest performance. August reconciliation, he said. I remember this adjustment. There was a processing error in one of the Caldwell accounts. This was the correction. There's no counter authorization, Nora said. Marcus looked at her. She was sitting to Damien's left with her notebook closed and her hands flat on the table, and she kept her voice factual, almost bored. Single adjustments under 50,000 don't require counter-authorization, Marcus said. That's the standing protocol. The standing protocol also requires a source account notation, she said. There isn't one. A pause. Marcus looked back at Damien. It was an administrative oversight. I can pull the original Caldwell file. Pull it, Damien said. I'll need access to the... Pull it now. Whatever access you need, Vern will clear it. Marcus looked at Vern, then back at Damien. Something moved behind his eyes, very briefly, like something pressing against glass from the other side. And then it was gone, and he nodded and said, "Of course," and stood up. Vern left with him. Nora and Damien were alone in the room. "He's lying," she said. "I know," Damien said. "You knew before I said it." "I suspected." He stood up and walked to the window. Outside was the city. Ordinary afternoon, people moving on the sidewalks below at the pace of people who didn't know they were being watched. "Marcus has been with me for 11 years. She didn't say anything. "He was with my father before that." He had his back to her. His hands were at his sides. "He's the one who taught me how to read a transaction ledger." "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be sorry." He turned from the window. "I need to know how deep it goes. The 42,000 is not the money. That's not what he wants. What he wants is something else, and he's using the financial system to do it." He paused. "That phone call to you last night. He was trying to find out what you'd reported to me, or trying to slow me down long enough to cover his tracks." "Yes." He looked at her directly. "Which means he knew about you before you made your first report. He accessed your file within hours of your arrival." "FIN7, she said. "He accessed my file the first day I was here." Damien's jaw tightened. 11 years, she said carefully, is a long time to learn how someone operates. "Yes." His voice was very flat. "It is." Well, the next 4 days were a controlled demolition. Damien could not move against Marcus directly. Not yet. Not without knowing who else was connected, who Marcus had been communicating with on the outside. What exactly he was trying to accomplish. Moving too fast would scatter the pieces, so instead they worked around him. Nora restructured the documentation access so that Marcus's financial queries began routing through a secondary filter she'd built. Invisible from his end, visible from hers. Every access he made, she saw it 6 seconds later. She slept 4 hours a night, maybe 5. She stopped noticing the difference. On the 3rd day, Marcus accessed a file labeled Operational Transition, which was a file Nora had created from scratch, built specifically to look like something Marcus would find valuable, and which contained absolutely nothing real. She watched the access notification come in at 11:47 at night, while she was sitting at the desk in her room with cold coffee and recorded every detail. She brought it to Damien at 6 the next morning. He looked at it for less time than usual. Then he said, "He's feeding information to Harlan Cole." Nora had suspected. The Cole meeting. He knew about it before it moved. "He moved it," Damien said quietly. "He's the one who told me about the schedule change." She let that sit for a moment. "He moved it so Cole could see me work, assess what I know. Or assess how to use you." Damien set the tablet down. His voice was controlled and deliberate and completely cold in the way that was more frightening than raised voices. "Cole's been looking for my internal financial records for 2 years. Marcus has been feeding him coordinates. He can't get the full picture. Too much is compartmentalized. But you..." He stopped. "He thinks I have access," she said. "You do have access, more than almost anyone in this building. And he wants to know what I do with it. He wants to know if you can be turned." Damien looked at her. "Or used." Nora put her hands flat on the desk, breathed once, slow. "What do you want me to do?" "Nothing different. Keep working. Let him think the bait is working. And when he moves..." "When he moves," Damien said, "I'll know." She nodded and stood to leave and then stopped because a thought had been sitting in the back of her mind for 3 days, and she'd been deciding whether to voice it, and she decided now. "The attack," she said, 2 years ago, the one that led to the federal investigation. Damien was still. It came from inside, she said. It wasn't a question, a long pause. Yes, he said. Was it Marcus? Another pause, longer. I don't know, he said, and she could hear in the tone that this was the truest thing he'd said to her since they'd met. Not controlled, not calculated, just true and heavy and tired in a way that surprised her. She left him with it. On the 5th day, everything changed. Nora was in the main office cross-referencing Cole's contact logs when her personal phone rang, the same unknown number. She answered it in 2 seconds. You didn't slow down, the voice said. Still unhurried, still reading from a list. No, she said. That's unfortunate. A pause. There's a gala Thursday, the Meridian Foundation charity event. Damien Vescari will attend. You'll be with him. How do you know that? Because Marcus Reeve confirmed the attendance list this morning. A pause. Come alone. Tell Vescari you're attending in your own capacity. Tell him the invitation came from the Whitlock family's hospital connection. There's a donor named Ashford. He won't check immediately. Come alone and I'll give you information about what Marcus is actually planning, what he's built, not just what you found. And if I don't, then what happens at the gala happens without you knowing it's coming. The voice paused. And it won't only be aimed at him. The line went dead. Nora sat in the silent office with the phone in her hand and the city humming outside the window, and every careful, methodical thing she'd built over the past 3 weeks. Her place in this house, her access, her usefulness, the fragile trust she'd accumulated with a man who trusted almost no one, lined up against a threat she couldn't evaluate because she didn't have enough information, which meant the rational answer was to tell Damien immediately, except telling Damien immediately meant exposing the fact that the contact had reached her twice now, and she still didn't know who it was, or what side they were actually on, or whether walking into a gala blind was worse than walking in, having already made her choice. She had until Thursday. It was Tuesday morning. She put the phone in her jacket pocket and went back to the cross-reference logs and stared at them without seeing them for 4 full minutes before her hands started moving again, and she forced herself back into the numbers, into the only thing she could currently control, while somewhere below her in this building, Marcus Reeve was doing whatever Marcus Reeve did on a Tuesday morning when he believed nobody was. She told Damien about the call at 4 in the afternoon, not because she'd decided it was the right move, because she ran out of road. She'd spent Tuesday morning and most of Tuesday afternoon building the case for staying quiet, assembling reasons the way she assembled documentation, methodically, with supporting logic. And every structure she built collapsed under the same weight. She didn't know who was on the other end of that phone. She didn't know what they actually had. She didn't know if the information they were offering about Marcus was real, or a mechanism designed to pull her out of Damien's orbit at exactly the moment Marcus needed her out. And she didn't know what "it won't only be aimed at him" meant, with enough specificity to calculate the risk of ignoring it. So she went to his office at 4 o'clock and told him. She told him the exact words. Both calls. The timeline. The name Ashford she'd been given, which she'd already verified was a real donor in the Meridian Foundation records. Someone with a hospital connection close enough to be plausible, far enough to require a moment to check. She told him all of it in the same order it had happened and watched his face do almost nothing through the entire recounting, which no longer surprised her. When she finished, the office was quiet for a long time. You waited until now, he said. I needed to decide what I was deciding. Which is what? Whether whoever is calling me is trying to help or trying to position me. She held his gaze. I still don't know. But the gala is Thursday, and you need to know the call happened regardless of what I think about it. Damien looked at her for a moment longer. Then he looked at the window. Ashford is real. Donation of $800,000 to the Meridian Cardiac Wing 2 years ago. His wife had surgery there. He paused. Marcus would know that. It's the kind of detail he'd use because it sounds verified. So Marcus made the call. Or Marcus gave someone the detail to use. He stood up. Which means the person on the phone may not be Marcus. They may be using Marcus's information without his knowledge. He moved to the monitor bank on the left wall and pulled up a contact log. The gala is a real event. I confirmed attendance 6 weeks ago. 300 guests. I'm presenting an award on behalf of the Viscari Foundation at 9 o'clock. You're still going? Yes. He looked back at her. And so are you, same as planned. He paused. But we're going prepared. Wednesday was infrastructure. Vern added 4 additional personnel to the gala security detail, all of them in event staff clothing rather than suits. Wait staff, a bartender, 2 people from the audio team. He briefed them separately from the main security roster, so the expansion wouldn't show up in the standard operational log that Marcus had access to. Nora watched him do it and thought about the specific geometry of trust in this building. Who knew what? Who knew? The layers of information management that kept a structure like this functioning. It was exhausting and intricate, and she had been inside it for less than a month, and it had already reshaped how she thought about rooms and people and what eyes were doing when mouths were talking. She rebuilt the gala documentation from scratch Wednesday afternoon. Guest list, venue layout, staff rosters, security sightlines. She built a secondary layout that she kept on her personal tablet rather than the shared system, marking every entrance, every blind spot, every room adjacent to the main ballroom that had exterior access. At 7 that evening, Marcus stopped by her office. She heard him in the doorway and did not look up immediately. Took 2 seconds to finish the line she was typing, which was deliberate, and then looked up with the mild expression of someone interrupted in the middle of unremarkable work. Late night, he said. He was pleasant, professionally warm, the way he always was. A man who understood that likability was its own form of armor. Gala prep, she said. Ah. He leaned against the doorframe, casual. Damien always overdoes it for the Meridian event. Last year we had 16-page briefing packets for a 3-hour dinner. 16 pages seems reasonable for 300 guests, she said. He smiled. It reached his eyes at approximately the right speed. You're thorough. That's good. He paused. How are you finding the work, honestly? She looked at him. Honestly? If you want. It's more complicated than the brief suggested, she said. But I'm managing. Damien can be, he paused, choosing, demanding, in ways that aren't always visible from the outside. Most demanding people are. True. He tilted his head slightly. If you ever find yourself in a position where you're not sure who to bring something to, professionally, I mean, my door's open. I've been navigating this organization for a long time. She held his gaze for exactly the right duration. Not too long, which would be suspicious. Not too short, which would be cold. I appreciate that, she said. He nodded once and left. She looked back at her screen and her hands had gone very still, and she sat with that stillness for a moment, letting it move through her. And then she kept working. Thursday came in cold and overcast. The kind of October sky that made the city look like a photograph of itself rather than the real thing. The Meridian Foundation Gala was at the Caldwell Grand, a hotel downtown with a ballroom that could hold 400 people, and had hosted this event every year for a decade. Nora had the floor plan memorized by 10 that morning. She dressed carefully. Dark navy. Nothing that would restrict movement. Low heels she could run in if she had to, which she acknowledged to herself as a thought she was now capable of having while choosing shoes. The convoy left the estate at 7:15. 3 vehicles, Vern in the lead car, Damien and Nora in the center, 2 additional personnel in the rear. Damien was in a black suit. He looked at his phone during the drive and said almost nothing, which had become his version of visible tension, the absence of even minimal conversation. You look like you're going to a deposition, she said. He glanced at her. Just an observation. He looked back at his phone. I've been to 43 of these events. I've never enjoyed a single one. Why keep going? The Meridian Foundation funds cardiac research. A pause. My father died of a heart attack at 58. I agreed to sponsor the wing before he died. It's been... He stopped. It's a commitment. She looked at him for a moment. He didn't look back. She turned to the window. My mother's surgery was at Meridian, she said. He was quiet for a beat. I know. Is that why you chose Creston General specifically? He didn't answer, but the silence had a texture to it that was different from his usual silences, and she filed it and looked back out the window and watched the city move past and thought about what it meant that a man who had researched her employment history had also, possibly, noticed where her mother's cardiologist was affiliated. She didn't know what to do with that yet. The ballroom was gold and white, and already 3/4 full when they arrived at 7:40. Chandeliers, round tables, a stage at the far end with a podium, and 2 screens showing foundation donor highlights on a slow loop. The noise level was the particular frequency of wealthy people performing ease at each other. Not quite comfortable, not quite competitive, something in between. Nora stayed 1 step behind Damien's right shoulder. She had her phone in her left hand and the secondary venue layout on her personal tablet in her bag. Vern was 30 feet ahead, already moving through the room with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who had done this so many times, his assessment had become automatic. The first hour was managed. She watched the room. She tracked exits. She clocked the positions of Vern's embedded personnel and checked them against where she'd expected them to be. Close enough. She watched the guest interactions with Damien, the way he navigated them. Precise, efficient, warmly professional in a way that was clearly practiced and just barely human enough to work. Donors. Foundation board members. A city councilwoman who shook his hand for 2 seconds longer than necessary. She noted 2 people who looked at Damien with something specific in their expressions. Not hostility, recognition. The kind of recognition that said, "We have an arrangement and tonight is not the moment to discuss it, but I see you." She noted a 3rd person who looked at Nora. Not Damien. Nora. He was mid-50s, charcoal suit, standing near the bar on the east wall. He looked at her for approximately 4 seconds, made no expression, and then looked away. She had never seen him before. She didn't recognize him from any files she'd processed. She recorded his position and kept moving. At 8:40, the lights dimmed for the evening's program, and 400 people settled into their seats. Nora was at the table to the left of the stage, 2 seats down from Damien. Vern was standing at the rear. The embedded personnel were distributed around the perimeter. The foundation director stepped to the podium. The first 2 program elements were unremarkable. A donor tribute video. A brief speech. Nora was watching the room, not the stage, and she saw it happening in pieces that didn't connect until they did. The man from the bar moving toward the east corridor at 8:52. A second person she hadn't flagged, a woman in green near the stage left exit, receiving a text and shifting her weight toward the door. A third person, waiter's uniform, the wrong posture for a waiter, moving too purposefully along the south wall. She had her phone out before she'd consciously decided to reach for it. She texted Vern, "East corridor, green dress stage left, south wall waiter." The reply came in 3 seconds, already on east, eyes on south, green dress confirm. She exhaled slowly. The director was introducing Damien. He stood, adjusted his jacket, moved toward the stage with the particular controlled calm that she had come to recognize as his public version of himself. The version built for rooms like this, which was both very good and nothing like the man in the office at 6 in the morning. He was 3 steps from the podium when the east corridor door opened. Not the man she'd flagged. 3 other men, moving fast. Wrong clothes for the event, wrong posture, wrong everything, and the room hadn't processed it yet because it happened in the specific window between one moment and the next when nobody is looking at the right thing. Nora was already moving. She didn't think about it. She was out of her chair and across the distance to the stage in the time it took the first guest to turn their head, and Damien heard her coming because he turned. He always seemed to be tracking everything simultaneously, even when he looked like he wasn't. And she grabbed his left arm and said one word into his ear. "Now." He moved. They went through the stage left door before the first shout reached the ballroom. Behind them she heard Vern's voice, loud and controlled, and then the particular compressed sound of the room, understanding that something was happening that wasn't on the program, and then they were in the service corridor behind the stage. White walls, industrial light, the smell of cleaning products and food, and Damien had her arm now, and they were moving. "How many?" he said. 3 through the east corridor, possibly others." "Vern? He knows." They hit the stairwell at the end of the corridor. Damien pushed through the door and they took the stairs down. Service exit. She'd marked it at 10 that morning, ground level, alley access on the north side of the building. She counted the floors as they moved, and her heels were loud on the concrete, and she kicked them off on the second landing and kept going in her bare feet because the floor was cold and hard and completely real, and she was very awake. Ground floor. The service door opened into a narrow alley. Damien's rear vehicle was 40 feet to the left. The driver had been monitoring, already had the door open, engine running. They got in. The door closed. The car moved. Nora sat in the back with her bare feet on the car floor and her heart running fast and even, and her mind cataloging every second of the past 4 minutes. Damien was on his phone. Vern's voice on the other end, managing the ballroom situation, personnel accounted for, local contact alerted. When Damien ended the call, the car was already on the highway. 3 men, he said. 2 through east, 1 staged as staff. 2 more were positioned on the north exterior. He looked at her. How did you see it? The timing. The barman moved 8 minutes before the East Corridor group. He was a signal, not an operator. The woman in green was a secondary exit cover. She paused. And the waiter's shoes were wrong. Work shoes, not service shoes. Damien looked at her for a long moment. This was not an improvised operation, he said. This was coordinated. They knew the program timing. They knew the seating arrangement. He paused. They knew which table you were at. She went still. Damien. The preliminary report from Vern's contact, he said carefully, indicates the team's objective was not elimination. She looked at him. Ballistic evidence from the East Corridor suggests warning shots only. The South Wall operative had a tranquilizer rig. His voice was completely level and completely cold. This was a kidnapping operation. The highway moved beneath them. They were coming for you, he said. Not me. Back at the estate, Vern had the security footage from the Caldwell Grand on 3 monitors within 40 minutes. The cameras were high resolution, and Vern's contact inside the hotel's security office had pulled the full feed, not the edited version. They watched it twice. The East Corridor team moved with professional precision. 3 men, coordinated entry, earpieces, the specific economy of motion that came from training rather than improvisation. The one staged as a waiter had been in position for 2 hours. He'd arrived with the legitimate catering staff, which meant someone had access to the catering company's employment roster. That takes time, Nora said. Getting someone embedded with the catering company. That's not a 48-hour operation. No, Vern said. That's weeks. They planned this before I was even here. Or they updated the plan when you arrived. Vern rewound the footage to the moment the east door opened. Look at the third man. Rear position. She looked. The third man was hanging back, not covering the entry, watching the room, specifically watching the stage area, and in his right hand, partially visible below the edge of his jacket, was a phone. He's documenting, she said. Yes. They wanted footage of whoever came out with you, Damien said from behind her. He was standing at the back of the room. She hadn't heard him come in. Which means they needed to confirm your identity in the field, which means whoever sent them gave them a description, but not a confirmed photograph. Marcus, Vern said flatly. Marcus accessed my file, Nora said. He knows what I look like. Marcus accessed your personnel file, Damien said, which has a staff photograph that is, he paused, 6 years old, from your first employment record. Your hair was different. The photograph is not a clear identification. She turned to look at him. He knows you exist, Damien said. He knows your name, your background, your function. But the people he's working with didn't have a current image. They needed field confirmation. He held her gaze. Which means Marcus has been careful. He's been feeding information in pieces. Controlled compartmentalization. He's protecting himself, Vern said, in case it goes wrong. If the operation fails, he can claim he gave them incomplete information. It did go wrong, Nora said. Yes. Damien looked at her, because you saw it coming. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Damien's phone rang. He looked at the screen. Something crossed his face, brief, unreadable, and he stepped into the hallway and pulled the door partially closed. She looked at Vern. Vern's face said nothing, but his eyes moved to the door and back to her, and that said something. She waited. Damien came back into the room 3 minutes later. He put the phone in his jacket pocket. He looked at the monitors for a moment. The frozen footage, the third man with the phone, and then he looked at Nora. "That was my contact at the Port Authority," he said. "There is a ledger, an actual physical ledger. It was created approximately 18 months ago, and it documents every financial alliance between 6 separate organizations in this city." He paused. "It also documents the specific accounts used to fund those alliances, every transfer, every arrangement. Whoever holds that ledger holds the complete financial architecture of every major criminal operation in Creston." Nora stood very still. "Marcus created it," Damien said. "He's been building it for a year and a half, transaction by transaction, pulling from every system he had access to through my organization." His voice was completely flat. "He doesn't want to destroy those alliances. He wants to own them. Present the ledger to the right buyer, and every organization in the city is either paying tribute to whoever holds it or facing federal exposure." "He's been planning a takeover," Vern said. "Not a question." "Yes, using my infrastructure, my records, my organization's financial relationships as the architecture." Damien looked at Nora. "And the reason they came for you tonight is that Marcus told them you had found it, or were about to." "I hadn't found it," she said. "No, but you found the notation, the 42,000. He paused. "Marcus panicked. He told his contacts that you had located the ledger and needed to be extracted before you could transmit the contents. He used me as a reason to move the operation early," she said slowly. "Yes." "Which means the timeline accelerated because of me." "Yes." She sat down in the nearest chair. Her bare feet were still cold from the parking structure floor. She pressed them flat against the carpet and focused on that sensation. Real, immediate, grounding. "Where's the ledger?" she said. Damien was quiet for a moment. "We don't know. Marcus has been careful. It's not digital. It's not on any system I can access." He looked at her. "But my contact believes it's been moved recently, in the last 48 hours. "Because Marcus knew the gala was happening," she said. "He moved it before the operation so that even if the operation succeeded and they extracted me, I couldn't lead them to something I didn't have. And if the operation failed," Vern said, "he still has the ledger. He loses his extraction team, but he keeps the asset." Damien walked to the window. Outside, the estate grounds were dark and quiet, the perimeter light steady along the wall. "He's been in this building for 11 years, he said. He said it the way you say something you've said before. Inside your own head, so many times the words have worn smooth. Every system, every account, every relationship." He turned. "And I put you in a room with him." "I'm fine," she said. "You were almost—" "I'm fine," she said again. Quieter, more final. He looked at her for a moment. Then he nodded once and looked away. It was Vern who said the next thing in the voice of someone delivering a fact that needed saying regardless of how it landed. "Marcus will know the operation failed by morning. When he knows it failed, he'll move. Either he runs with the ledger or he escalates." "He escalates," Damien said without hesitation. "Running means losing everything he built. He doesn't run." "Then we have until morning," Nora said. "Maybe less." She stood up. Her mind had already moved past the ballroom, past the footage on the monitors, past the cold floor and the stairwell, and the 11 seconds she'd spent deciding to move toward the stage. It had moved into the next problem, which was the only place it knew how to go. "He'll contact whoever's been buying the information," she said. "Tonight, if he hasn't already. He'll want to know what they're prepared to offer for the ledger directly, cut out the operation, sell the asset outright before everything collapses." She looked at Damien. "If we can intercept that contact, we can find the buyer," he said. "And the buyer leads to the ledger." Vern was already moving to the communications console. Damien looked at Nora. His expression had something in it she hadn't seen before. Not quite gratitude, something adjacent to it, something that had more weight than gratitude and less comfort. "You should get shoes," he said. She looked down at her feet. "Right." She turned toward the door and had almost reached it when Vern said her name. She stopped. He was looking at his monitor. Something had shifted in his posture. The specific stillness of a man who has just read something he needs a second to process. "What?" she said. He turned the monitor toward her. It was a security alert from Creston General Hospital. Flagged 37 minutes ago. She read it once, and the information rearranged itself in her brain the way information does when it lands exactly wrong. Not confusion, instant terrible. The security alert was 4 lines. Nora read them twice. Unauthorized access attempt, patient ward 412. Creston General Hospital, 2214. Security personnel responded. Individual fled via east stairwell. Patient unharmed. Patient unharmed. She read those 2 words a third time and felt something move through her chest. Not relief. The thing that comes before relief, the moment when the body decides whether it's going to hold together or not. It held. Barely. "That's my mother's room," she said. Her voice came out flat and even, and she was distantly proud of that. Vern was already on the phone. Damien had crossed the room in the time it took her to read the alert a third time and was standing beside her looking at the screen. "She's not harmed," he said. "I know." "Nora." "I know." She set the tablet down on the desk with both hands because she needed to put it somewhere solid. "He sent someone to her room, tonight, while the gala was running." She looked at Damien. It wasn't a threat. It was a contingency. If the extraction succeeded, my mother was insurance. If it failed, he still has a lever, Damien said. Yes. The room was very quiet except for Vern on the phone, his voice low and controlled and moving fast. She made a decision in the next 4 seconds, and it was not a complicated decision. It was the only available decision. "I need to go to the hospital." "I know," Damien said. "Vern." "Already on it," Vern said without turning around. 2 personnel en route, ETA 9 minutes. They'll be outside her door before we clear the gate. Nora looked at Damien. "Get your shoes," he said. The drive to Creston General took 19 minutes. Nora spent them looking out the window and running the geometry of the situation through her head the way she ran financial cross-references, systematically, without allowing the personal weight of it to collapse the structure. Marcus had moved on 2 fronts simultaneously tonight: the gala operation and the hospital contingency. That level of coordination required resources beyond a single financial advisor with a grudge. He had been building this for 18 months, and the infrastructure was real and operational, and she had underestimated the scale of it because she'd been focused on the financial architecture and the ledger and hadn't fully extended the logic to what a man with that much preparation was willing to do to protect it. She extended it now. He was willing to use her mother. That was the information she'd been missing, and now she had it, and it changed the calculation completely because it meant there was no version of this that ended with Marcus Reeve walking away from a negotiation. There was only a version where he was stopped, fully, or a version where nothing was safe. She thought about Ellen in room 412 with her cardiac monitor and her thin hospital blanket, and her habit of telling Nora to stop worrying. She stopped worrying. She started planning. "The ledger," she said. Damien looked at her. He moved it in the last 48 hours, before the gala, which means he anticipated the gala failing. He's not improvising, yet he has a sequence. She turned from the window. The next step in the sequence is either he contacts the buyer directly or he creates a public incident, something that forces everyone's hand, forces yours. A public incident. He needs you reactive. He spent 18 months being careful, and now the timeline is broken and he needs you to move fast and wrong. She paused. What's the most valuable thing he could threaten that would make you move fast and wrong? Damien's jaw was tight. The legitimate businesses. The people inside them. How many employees? 412 across 9 companies. He has access to the operational structures of all 9. Yes. Then that's the sequence. Hospital was insurance on me. The next move is the businesses. Something that exposes them, damages them, or creates legal liability fast enough that you're forced to respond publicly. She looked at him. He wants you in the open. He wants you making decisions in real time where he can see the pressure. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not the evaluating look, something past that. Like a man recalibrating a measurement he thought he'd already taken. "You've been thinking about this since the monitor room," he said. "I've been thinking about this since I read the ledger notation 6 days ago," she said. "I just didn't know the full shape of it until tonight." The car pulled into the hospital parking structure. Podsam. Ellen Whitlock was awake. She was sitting up in bed with the television on low and a crossword puzzle book open on her lap, and she looked up when Nora came through the door and said, "Sweetheart," in the voice that had not changed since Nora was 7 years old, worn and warm and completely ordinary, the most ordinary sound in the world, and Nora stood in the doorway for 1 second and let it land and then crossed the room and sat on the edge of the bed. "There was some kind of security situation," Ellen said. "Someone in the hallway. They said it was handled." "It was handled," Nora said. Ellen looked at her. Ellen had a specific look she used when she believed she was being managed, developed over 53 years of dealing with people who thought she needed protecting. She deployed it now. "Nora. Mom. You look like you haven't slept in a week." "It's been a busy week." Ellen looked past her at Damien, who had come through the door behind Nora and was standing near the wall with his hands in his pockets and the careful stillness of a man trying to take up minimal space in a room that wasn't his. Ellen looked at him, then at Nora, then at him again with the comprehensive assessment of a woman who had run a school cafeteria for 22 years and could read a room full of teenagers in under 4 seconds. "You're the one who paid for the surgery," she said to Damien. It wasn't a question. Damien looked at Nora. "She figured it out 3 weeks ago," Nora said. "She didn't say anything because she was waiting for me to bring it up." "I was," Ellen confirmed. Damien looked at Ellen Whitlock. "Yes," he said, "I am." Ellen was quiet for a moment, then she said, "Are you going to keep my daughter safe?" The room was very still. "Yes," he said. Ellen looked at him for another few seconds with the look she used for things she was deciding whether to believe. Then she looked back at her crossword. 8 letters. Second letter is X, means to make more intense. Exasperatory, Nora said automatically. That's 10 letters. Expedite. That works. Ellen wrote it in. Go do what you need to do. There are 2 large men outside my door now. I counted their footsteps. Nora stood up. She pressed her hand over her mother's briefly. Ellen put her hand over Nora's and squeezed once, short and firm, and then went back to the puzzle. Nora left. In the corridor outside, she pulled out her phone and opened the secondary venue map she'd built for the gala, then overlaid it with the Port Authority floor plan she'd pulled 3 hours ago when Damien's contact mentioned the waterfront. She had been building this map in her head for 6 days without knowing what it was a map of. Now she knew. She found Damien at the end of the corridor talking quietly to Vern. The port, she said. They both looked at her. Marcus moved the ledger recently. It's physical. It needs to be somewhere secure but accessible, somewhere he controls access to without it being obvious. She held up her phone. He's been routing financial adjustments through a Caldwell subsidiary for 8 months. Caldwell has a bonded warehouse at the Harwick Port Terminal. Container storage, private access, climate-controlled. She paused. It's the only location in his operational footprint that's not connected to your systems. He's been building a firebreak. Vern looked at Damien. It also, Nora continued, has an automated cargo system, remote-operated container management, crane control. The whole terminal can be run from a central panel. She looked at Damien directly. If he's planning to meet a buyer tonight, because the timeline broke and he needs to move the asset before you close the access points, it would be there. Controlled environment, his territory. And if we move on the terminal, Vern said slowly, we're moving on Caldwell-connected property. That has exposure. Only if we do it wrong, Nora said. Damien looked at her. What does doing it right look like? I go in first, she said, through the administrative access. I have the Caldwell account credentials from the reconciliation work. They're still active. Marcus didn't flag them for revocation because doing so would draw attention to the Caldwell connection. She held his gaze. I get into the cargo management system before anyone moves physically. I find out who's there, I confirm the ledger's location, and I create a situation where Marcus's own containment infrastructure works against him. The corridor was quiet. You're not trained for field operations, Vern said. I'm trained for systems, she said. And that terminal is a system. Vern looked at Damien. Something moved between them. The specific communication of two people who have worked together long enough to hold an entire conversation without speaking. Damien looked at Nora. You stay on comms. You don't move from the access panel. If the situation changes, I adapt. If it changes beyond the system, I call it and I get out, she said. I know. He held her gaze for one more moment. Then he turned to Vern and said two words. Get everyone. Bashem. The Harwick Port Terminal was 24 minutes from the hospital at that hour, the city thinning out to industrial stretches, and then the particular darkness of the waterfront, cranes against the sky like enormous frozen animals, the smell of salt and diesel and wet concrete, floodlights burning white over stacks of containers that rose 40 feet in organized rows. They staged 3 vehicles in a maintenance lot 800 feet from the terminal's east entrance, 8 personnel total. Vern ran the brief in under 4 minutes. Entry points, assignments, communication protocol, abort signal, clean and fast. Nora was in the 3rd vehicle with a laptop connected to the terminal's administrative network, her credentials already verified, the system layout already open. She had been inside the Caldwell cargo management system for 11 minutes before they moved. She found 3 active personnel badges inside the terminal. 2 of them matched the maintenance staff roster for the night shift. The 3rd was logged under a visitor credential issued 6 hours ago, a name she didn't recognize, which meant it was either a buyer representative or a cover identity, both of which told her the same thing. She found the cargo manifest for the Caldwell bonded section and pulled the recent access log. Container C447 had been accessed at 9:47 p.m., 53 minutes ago. 40-foot high cube. Climate controlled. Currently stationary in row 7. She sent the container number to Vern. His response was immediate. Copy. Moving. The terminal's automated crane system had a manual override function accessible through the administrative panel. She'd found it 8 minutes ago and had not touched it. She sat with her hands on the keyboard and watched the personnel tracker on the secondary screen. 3 badges, their positions updated every 40 seconds based on the terminal's internal sensors. The 2 maintenance staff were in the north section. Stationary. The visitor badge was moving. From row 7 toward the west loading area. She watched it move for 3 updates, 120 seconds, and then it stopped. West loading dock. The dock that had exterior vehicle access directly to the private service road. He was preparing to leave. Vern, she said into the earpiece. Visitor badge is at the west dock. He's moving the asset out. How long? Minutes. Maybe less. A pause. We're at row 4. Moving. She looked at the crane control panel. The terminal had 6 automated cranes, each capable of moving 40-foot containers on pre-programmed routes. She pulled up crane 4, the one positioned over the route between row 7 and the west dock, and looked at its current status. Standby. No active job queued. She queued a job. Container repositioning, row 7 to row 9, secondary staging. Estimated transit time, 6 minutes. The crane would move along the track directly over the service path between the container stacks and the west dock. She authorized it, and the crane woke up. She watched the tracker. The visitor badge stopped moving. Movement paused at the dock, she said. Copy, Vern said. 60 seconds. She tracked the crane on the terminal map. Moving at operational speed, its running lights blinking yellow in the darkness above the container rows. She could hear it faintly even from 800 feet away in the maintenance lot. The low mechanical grind of something enormous doing exactly what it was told. Then the gunshot. It was distant and flat, and she felt it more in her sternum than heard it. And then Vern's voice in her ear, controlled, taut, 1 register below urgent. Contact West Dock. 2 additional personnel unaccounted for. Moving to secondary. And then a burst of static, and then nothing. Vern, she said. Nothing. She looked at the personnel tracker. The 2 maintenance badges were moving now. North section, moving fast toward the west dock. Not maintenance staff. She'd been tracking the wrong people. The visitor badge was gone. Either the credential had been deactivated, or whoever was carrying it had moved into a sensor dead zone near the dock's exterior wall. She was out of the vehicle before she'd made a conscious decision to move. She knew she'd told Damien she would stay on the system. She knew that. She had the laptop under her arm and her earpiece in, and she was moving across the maintenance lot toward the terminal's east pedestrian entrance because the alternative was sitting in a car while the situation resolved itself without her input. And she had information that Vern currently did not have: the location of every active personnel sensor in this terminal and exactly which paths were covered and which were not. The east entrance required a key card. She had the administrative credentials. She used them. The door opened. Inside the terminal was a different world, vast and cold and loud with the ambient noise of machinery and the specific acoustics of enormous enclosed spaces. Floodlights overhead, container rows stretching away into organized darkness, the crane still moving on its track above. She ran along the east wall, keeping close to the containers. Row 4, Vern's last position. She turned the corner and nearly collided with one of Damien's personnel, a man named Garrett, whom she recognized from the estate, who looked at her with an expression that said, "What are you doing here?" and to his credit, did not stop to ask it out loud. "Vern," she said, "West Dock. He's with Damien. There's a problem." She moved. The West Dock was a loading platform 20 feet wide, steel grating, forklift access on both ends. The exterior wall opened to the service road where 2 vehicles were parked with their lights off. She came around the corner of the last container row and stopped. Damien was on the platform. Marcus Reeve was 10 feet in front of him. Marcus did not look like the man from the office doorway, professionally warm, carefully pleasant. He looked like the architecture behind that man, stripped of its cladding. His posture was different. His face was different. He held a phone in his right hand and something in his left that she couldn't immediately identify. And he was talking to Damien in a voice she'd never heard him use. Not the reading glasses warmth, something underneath that, old and cold and absolutely certain of itself. "Been patient for 11 years, Marcus was saying. 11 years of watching you dismantle what your father built, piece by piece. The man handed you an empire, and you've been shrinking it ever since." "Into something legal?" Damien said. His voice was completely level. "Into something weak." 2 men flanked Marcus. One of them was watching Damien. The other was watching the perimeter. He'd already clocked Garrett behind Nora, which meant he knew they were there. Vern was to Damien's left, 3 feet back, blood on his jacket from a cut above his ear, holding himself very carefully still. The ledger was in Marcus's left hand. A physical ledger. Dark cover, thick, the kind of bound document that looked like an accounting book from 40 years ago. She could see the corner of it below his fingers. She stood at the edge of the container row and looked at the dock and the positions and the 2 vehicles on the service road and the crane overhead that was still moving, still crossing the terminal on its programmed route, its running lights blinking yellow against the black sky. The crane. She looked at her laptop screen. The crane's route had been repositioned to move between rows 7 and 9. The route took it directly over the West Dock Service Road. Its current position was 40 seconds from passing over the exterior vehicles. She looked at the 2 vehicles on the service road, then at Marcus, then at the crane. She opened the cargo management panel. Container C447 was still in row 7. 82,000 pounds, empty of product but full of air and steel and operational weight. She queued a second crane job, container C447, row 7 to West Dock exterior staging. Immediate priority. The crane system flagged a conflict. She was asking it to change direction mid-route, which required supervisor authorization. She had supervisor credentials. She used them. The crane stopped. On the dock, Marcus heard it. The sound changed. The grinding of the crane shifting direction. The enormous mechanical recalibration of something built to move weight that human beings couldn't conceptualize. His eyes went up involuntarily. 1 second of distraction, his attention fractured between Damien and the sound above. Damien moved. He covered the 10 feet between them before Marcus's eyes came back down and took Marcus by the wrist, and the impact of it sent the ledger skidding across the steel grating toward the edge of the platform. And Nora was already running, laptop under her arm, onto the dock because the ledger was sliding and the edge was 12 feet away, and she went down on one knee on the steel grating and caught it with both hands 2 feet from the drop. The 2 flanking men moved. Garrett and 2 others she hadn't seen came from the container rows, and it was loud and fast, and the crane overhead was moving again, its hook swinging as it repositioned, the sound of it enormous in the cold air. And Marcus was fighting with a ferocity she hadn't expected from a 60-year-old man who moved quietly through office corridors. Because of course he was. Because the architecture behind the warmth had been built for exactly this, for the moment when everything else fell away. Nora got to her feet with the ledger pressed against her chest. One of the flanking men was looking at her. He had broken away from the main confrontation and was crossing the dock toward her with the specific directness of a man with a single objective. Not her, the book in her hands, and she stepped back toward the exterior wall, and her mind did the same thing it had done in the ballroom, assessed, processed, moved. She keyed the crane override on her laptop. Emergency stop, full halt. The crane locked overhead with a sound like a freight train braking, its container payload swinging once and stopping, 60 feet above the service road, directly over the exterior vehicles. The man coming toward her stopped, looked up, looked at the container, looked at her. She met his eyes over the laptop screen. "I can drop it," she said. Her voice was very steady. "On your vehicles. On this dock. On whatever you need it not to drop on." She kept her hand on the emergency release function. "Or you can stop moving." He stopped moving. On the dock, Damien had Marcus on the ground with one knee and both wrists. Marcus was breathing hard, his glasses gone somewhere on the steel grating, his careful professional face completely dismantled. The two other men had been contained by Garrett's team. Vern was on his feet, one hand pressed against his ear, already back on comms. The dock was very loud with breathing and the ambient sounds of the terminal and the crane overhead, locked and waiting. Marcus looked up at Damien from the ground. His expression had moved past fighting into something else. Not defeat, not yet. Something that was making the calculation about what came next. "The buyer," Damien said. His voice was controlled and low and had a quality in it she'd heard once before, in the car after the dinner with the gray jacket man. The quality of someone who has moved past the question of whether something is going to happen and is now only determining how. Marcus said nothing. "Marcus," Damien leaned down, "the buyer's name." "You think the name matters," Marcus said. His breathing was ragged, but his voice was still cold. "You contain this here, tonight, and there are 4 other people who know what's in that ledger. What your father built. What you tried to bury." He coughed once. "You can't make this small again. It's already—" "The name," Damien said. Silence. Then Marcus looked past Damien, looked at Nora, still holding the ledger with both hands, laptop balanced, the crane release under her thumb. He looked at her with an expression she had not expected and could not immediately catalog. Something between calculation and something older. Something that might have been respect if it hadn't also been the look of a man identifying the exact thing that beat him. "Harlan Cole," he said. The dock was still. "Cole has been building toward this for 2 years," Marcus said, his voice flat and factual now, the warmth stripped entirely. "He doesn't want the alliances. He wants the leverage. He presents the ledger to the right federal contact. Every organization in this city collapses except his, because he's already made his arrangement. He walks out clean and inherits everything." He paused. "He's been waiting for me to deliver." "Where?" Damien said. "He's not at the dock," Marcus said. "He's watching it. He's been watching this terminal for 40 minutes. If I don't send a confirmation code in—" He looked at his watch. His wrists were still held, but he moved enough to read it. 11 minutes. He initiates the federal disclosure. 11 minutes. Damien looked up, found Nora's eyes across the dock. She was already looking at the laptop screen. The terminal's external camera system. 12 cameras covering the perimeter, the service road, the exterior approaches. She switched through them fast. 1, 2, 3, 4. And on camera 7, positioned at the terminal's south access point, there was a vehicle. Dark sedan. Parked on the shoulder of the access road 200 meters from the terminal gate, lights off, engine running based on the exhaust visible in the cold air. She turned the laptop so Damien could see the screen from across the dock. He looked at it. Then he looked at Vern. "South access," he said. "Now." Vern was moving before the second word landed. Marcus was watching Damien with the expression of a man watching a clock. And Nora stood on the steel dock with an 82,000-pound container locked overhead and a ledger pressed against her chest and 9 minutes remaining, and looked at. Nora looked at the laptop screen and looked at the camera feed and looked at the sedan on the shoulder of the access road and understood with the particular clarity that comes after sustained fear. Not calm, something leaner than calm, the thing that is left when everything else has burned off. That 9 minutes was not enough time for Vern to reach that vehicle and resolve what was inside it. Not through the terminal, not on foot. She looked at the crane overhead, locked and waiting, its container swinging fractionally in the cold air off the water. She looked at the service road. She looked at the 2 vehicles Marcus's men had arrived in, still parked at the dock exterior, keys presumably inside. She looked at Garrett. "Can you drive one of those?" He looked at the vehicles. Back at her. "Yes." "South access point, 200 meters past the gate, dark sedan, engine running." She held out the laptop. "Camera 7, go." He took the laptop and ran. She turned back to the dock. Damien still had Marcus on the ground. The remaining flanking man was contained by 2 of Damien's personnel, zip-tied to a dock cleat with his own equipment, because Garrett's team was efficient and apparently carried zip ties as a matter of professional habit. Marcus was not fighting anymore. He was lying on the steel grating looking at the sky with the expression of a man who has finished running a very long race and is now simply waiting to find out what finishing means. 8 minutes, Marcus said, to no one in particular. Damien looked at Nora. "Garrett's moving," she said. "If Cole initiates the disclosure, he won't," she said. She didn't know that. She said it anyway because the alternative required a plan she didn't have yet, and she had learned in the past 3 weeks that there was a version of certainty that was not about knowing. It was about committing to the next move so completely that uncertainty became irrelevant. She walked to the edge of the dock and looked at the external camera on the south-facing wall. The sedan was still there, still running. She could see the faint bloom of exhaust in the cold air on the camera feed from the laptop she'd handed Garrett, which she could no longer see. She looked at her phone. She looked at the terminal's administrative system she'd left open on the secondary screen. She went into the communications log. Every terminal access credential, every external contact registered in the administrative system for the past 72 hours. There. A visitor credential issued 6 hours ago, the same one that had gone dark on the personnel tracker, issued under the name Leland Price, which was the name of a Caldwell subsidiary's regional manager who had retired 14 months ago and whose credentials had apparently never been deactivated. Somebody had known that. The visitor credential had accessed the terminal's external communications relay at 22:41. 17 minutes ago. She pulled the relay log, a single outbound signal. Not a call. A data packet. Compressed, encrypted, sent to an external IP address that resolved when she ran it through the terminal's network identifier to a mobile communications unit. A unit in a vehicle. The sedan. Cole had a direct feed from the terminal, not through Marcus. Direct. He'd been watching the terminal's internal cameras himself, through the relay, which meant he didn't need Marcus's confirmation code. He had his own eyes inside this building. Her stomach dropped. "Damien," she said. He looked at her. He read her face. "What?" "Cole doesn't need the confirmation code. He's been watching through the terminal's relay. He can see this dock." She held up her phone. "He's watching right now." The dock was very still for 2 seconds. Then Marcus laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. Short and dry and exhausted, and somewhere inside it was genuine. The laugh of someone who has watched a situation develop exactly as he built it to develop. "He's been watching for 20 minutes, Marcus said from the ground. His voice was flat. "He saw your people come through the east entrance. He saw the crane stop. He's already made the call." Damien stood up from Marcus, stood to his full height, and breathed once, slow and controlled. His jacket was torn at the left shoulder. His hands were at his sides. He looked at the camera on the south wall, looked directly into it, knowing Cole was on the other side, and his expression was the most exposed she had ever seen it. Not open. Exposed. The way a building looks after the facade comes off. Structural, undecorated, everything load-bearing. Nora looked at the communications relay in the administrative system. The data packet had gone out at 22:41. She looked at the timestamp on the current system clock. 22:53. 12 minutes since the packet sent. She looked at the relay again. Looked at the IP resolution. Looked at the mobile communications unit designation. She thought about what you did with the ledger. What it actually was. Not the information it contained, but the infrastructure that made that information valuable. The fact that it was complete, that it documented every connection, that its power came from being a single comprehensive source rather than scattered pieces. She thought about what happened to a comprehensive source if its contents were already public. She went back into the terminal's administrative system, found the external communications relay output settings. The relay had been built for legitimate terminal operations, broadcasting container manifests, customs documentation, shipping schedules. It could broadcast to a single recipient or to an open network. She changed the output setting. Then she looked at the ledger in her hands. It was a physical document, paper, organized in columns in Marcus's precise handwriting, account numbers, transfer amounts, dates, organizational designations written in a shorthand she'd been decoding mentally for the past 45 minutes. She had photographed 12 pages on her phone during the time on the dock when she'd been holding it, 12 pages out of what looked like 60. She looked at Damien. "I need 4 minutes." He looked at her, at the ledger, at the camera on the south wall. "Nora, 4 minutes," she said. "Keep Cole watching." She sat down on the steel grating with the ledger open in her lap and her phone in her hand and photographed every remaining page. Her hands were not shaking. The grating was cold through the thin fabric of her dress. She was aware of both of these things, and neither of them slowed her down. 48 pages in 3 minutes and 50 seconds. She stood up and went back to the laptop and opened the relay broadcast settings and attached the image files and set the distribution to open network. Every contact in the terminal's registered communications directory, which included, because this was a bonded customs facility, 3 separate federal oversight agencies, 2 international shipping authorities, and the Regional Commerce Regulatory Office. She looked at Damien. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen on him before, and would spend considerable time afterward trying to name. It was not surprise. It was something that had surprise as one of its components, but was larger than that. The expression of a man recalibrating something fundamental. "This transmits the ledger," she said, "to federal contacts, to everyone." She paused. "It destroys Marcus's asset. Cole can't use what's already public. The federal contacts will have to investigate every organization named, including yours. The legitimate businesses survive scrutiny. The rest doesn't," he said. "Yes." He looked at the camera on the south wall again. "This ends a lot of things." "Yes," she said. "It does." The dock was quiet except for the water sounds beyond the exterior wall and the distant mechanical breath of the terminal and Marcus Reeve lying on the steel grating looking at the sky. "Do it," Damien said. She transmitted. The sedan on the South Access Road left within 90 seconds of the transmission going out. Garrett tracked it for 6 blocks before it turned onto the interstate and accelerated beyond reasonable pursuit. He called it in and let it go. Harlan Cole was in the wind for approximately 11 hours. The federal disclosure hit 3 agency inboxes at 22:57. By 6 in the morning, 2 of those agencies had open investigations. By 10, Cole's offices in 3 cities had been served with preservation orders. By 2 in the afternoon, Harlan Cole was in federal custody at an airport in a city that was not Creston, standing at a gate for a flight that was not going to any destination associated with a cooperative extradition treaty, which told you everything you needed to know about how prepared he had been for a version of this that went wrong. He had been prepared. He just hadn't been prepared for Nora. Yet, Marcus Reeve was taken from the terminal by Damien's people and delivered to a federal contact at 6:15 a.m. with a complete documentation package that Nora spent the remainder of the night assembling. Every financial notation, every access log, every anomaly in every system she'd audited in the past 3 weeks, organized into a presentation that a federal prosecutor would be able to read without explanation. She had done this kind of work before. She knew what clarity looked like on paper. She handed the package to Damien at 5:50 a.m., 1 hour before the federal contact arrived. He looked at it for 3 minutes. Then he looked at her. "You've been building this for 3 weeks," he said. 2.5, she said. "I didn't know what I was building for the first 4 days." He set the package down carefully, like something that had weight beyond its physical weight. "This implicates my organization." "The parts that can't survive scrutiny, yes." She held his gaze. "The legitimate businesses are documented separately. The audit trail is clean. Any investigator who reads this will see the distinction." "You drew the distinction deliberately." "Yes." He was quiet. "It had to be complete," she said. "If it wasn't complete, it wasn't credible. If it wasn't credible, it didn't stop Cole." She paused. "And if it didn't stop Cole, my mother's room number was still in Marcus's files." Damien looked at the window. Outside, the estate grounds were gray with early morning, the trees still, the perimeter lights fading as the sky came up. "The parts of this organization that were not legitimate," he said carefully, "employed people. Families." "I know. I documented the employment structure separately. The families aren't named." She paused. "The investigators will see that too." He turned from the window and looked at her, and she could see on his face the particular exhaustion of someone who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and has just set it down and is not yet sure what it feels like to stand without it. "You protected them," he said, not accusing, not grateful, stating. "I protected what could be protected," she said. "The rest, I'm sorry, but the rest was already broken." He nodded once, slowly. Then he went to his desk and sat down and picked up the documentation package again and began to read it properly, from the beginning, and she left him to it. The federal process was long and unglamorous in the way that institutional machinery is always long and unglamorous. Meetings, documentation requests, legal review, 2 occasions where Nora sat in a room with federal investigators and answered questions for 3 hours at a stretch with a lawyer present whom Damien had provided, and who was, she had to acknowledge, exceptionally good. The investigations ran parallel. Marcus Reeve pled to a reduced charge in exchange for cooperation in the Cole prosecution and was sentenced in a proceeding that received a paragraph in the local paper. Harlan Cole's case was more complex, more public, and took 8 months to reach its conclusion, at which point he received a sentence of sufficient length that its details felt almost beside the point. The Viscari organization contracted significantly. The 3 companies with the cleanest operational structures survived the scrutiny intact. The other 6 were restructured, sold, or dissolved over the following 6 months. 412 employees went through a process that Damien managed with the same disciplined precision he brought to everything: severance, placement assistance, in 4 cases, direct financial support for families in circumstances that warranted it. Nora built the administrative framework for the transition. She did it because it was her job and because she was good at it, and because the 412 people in question had not made the choices that put them there, and that distinction mattered to her, even when the legal system didn't require it to. The first time she visited her mother after the terminal, she sat in room 412 for 2 hours and didn't explain anything that had happened, and Ellen didn't ask. Ellen was 8 weeks from discharge. Her cardiac function had improved past what the surgeon had projected as the optimistic outcome. She was doing the crossword every morning and complaining about the food in a way that was so ordinary and so completely herself that Nora sat with it and felt something unknot in her chest that had been tight since the night 6 weeks ago when she'd first seen the billing statement. Ellen asked how the new job was going. Nora said complicated. Ellen said that was usually a good sign in her experience because simple jobs were usually simple because nothing in them mattered. Nora looked at her mother across the hospital tray table and thought about Marcus Reeve on the dock looking at the sky and Damien looking into the south wall camera and 9 minutes and 60 feet of steel and the sound a crane makes when it stops. "Yeah," she said. "I think you're right." The year ended on a Thursday in October, which Nora noted because it was the same day of the week she'd signed the discharge papers at Sandra's desk, which felt like something a novelist would put in on purpose, and which real life had apparently decided to do anyway. Damien called her into his office at 8 in the morning, not 6. 8, which was unusual, and the office was different. Not different in any specific way she could identify, just different in atmosphere, like a room where a window has been opened that is normally closed. He was standing when she came in, not at his desk. Standing near the window the way he'd stood on that first Wednesday when she'd told him about Marcus, and he'd turned from the glass with something exposed on his face. He was holding a document. She recognized it from across the room. The contract. 2 pages. Her signature at the bottom. The terms she had agreed to on the 2nd day of October of the previous year in the back of a black SUV outside a hospital. He held it over the desk and tore it once, clean and deliberate. Set the 2 halves down. "You fulfilled your promise," he said. The room was very quiet. "You're free," he said. She looked at the 2 halves of the document on the desk. Then she looked at him. He was watching her with the same directness he'd watched her with on day 1. Steady, undeflecting, the gaze of someone who had decided a long time ago that looking away was a form of dishonesty he wasn't interested in. She thought about what she'd told herself on day 1. 1 year, the number precise and bounded, a thing you could hold and put down when it was finished. She thought about the contract's terms and what they hadn't covered. The dinners where she'd learned to read the table before she sat down. The nights at the secondary office where the work had felt more real and more hers than anything she'd done before. The morning she'd built a color-coded system, and a man who trusted almost nobody had shown it to his head of security and said, "Make these talk to each other." She thought about a crane stopped 60 feet in the air and a ledger in her lap on cold steel grating and 4 minutes of the clearest thinking she had ever done. She thought about Damien saying, "Good in the dark car" after the dinner, to no one in particular. She looked at the 2 halves of the contract. "I know I'm free," she said. He held her gaze. "The restructuring documentation for the 3 remaining companies needs a new administrative framework," she said. "The transition system I built is temporary. It'll need rebuilding from scratch if it's going to work long term." She paused. "I've been thinking about how to do it for about 6 weeks." Something moved in his expression. Not the fraction of a movement she'd cataloged over the past year. Something more than that. Something that had been waiting for enough space to exist. "That would take time," he said. "Yes," she said. "It would." A pause. "The compensation would need to be different," he said. "The original arrangement was—" "I know what the original arrangement was," she said. "I'm not in the original arrangement anymore." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What are you in?" She looked at him. At the window behind him and the October light coming through it, and the estate grounds outside, the trees past peak color, the leaves beginning to let go. "Something I chose," she said, "which is different." The room was quiet for a long time. Then Damien moved from the window and sat down at his desk and picked up a pen and pulled a clean sheet of paper from the left drawer. He looked at her. "Tell me what the new administrative framework needs," he said. She sat down across from him and clasped her hands on the desk and began to talk, and he began to write. And outside the window the October light moved across the grounds, the way it had every morning for the past year, steady and indifferent and completely ordinary. And inside the office, 2 people who had come to each other under the worst possible circumstances and had somehow, through the specific alchemy of crisis and competence, and the kind of trust that only gets built when it's been tested past the point most people are willing to go, made something neither of them had planned on. Not a transaction, not an obligation, not a year on a contract that could be torn in half and set on a desk. Something that had been chosen. Freely. By both of them. On a Thursday in October, with the leaves coming down outside and the work still to be done, which was the only way it could have been chosen, not in the absence of everything else they'd been through, but because of it. Bakeb. Ellen Whitlock was discharged from Creston General on a Wednesday in late November. She walked out through the main entrance under her own power, which her cardiologist had not guaranteed, and which she had clearly decided to accomplish through sheer personal stubbornness, a quality she had in quantities that no diagnostic test had ever adequately measured. Nora was waiting outside. They drove back to Ellen's apartment. Nora had restocked it the week before, filled the refrigerator, replaced the dead plant on the windowsill, put new batteries in the smoke detector that had been beeping since August, And Ellen walked through it the way she walked through everything, taking a complete inventory with her eyes before she committed to her response. "You cleaned," Ellen said. "A little. You replaced my plant. The other one was dead." "I know it was dead. I was attached to it anyway." Ellen set her bag down and looked at the new plant, a small fiddle-leaf fig, which Nora had chosen because it seemed hardy. "It'll do." She went to the kitchen and filled a glass of water and drank half of it standing at the sink the way she always had, which was one of 1,000 small things Nora had not realized she had memorized until she saw it again. "Is he coming for dinner?" Nora looked at her. "What?" "The man, Vescari." Ellen refilled the glass. "You said you were bringing someone." "I said I was thinking about it." "You don't think out loud unless you've already decided." Ellen turned around and leaned against the counter and looked at her daughter with the comprehensive assessment she'd been deploying for 30 years. "So, is he coming?" Nora was quiet for a moment. "Yes," she said. Ellen nodded, like something confirmed that she had already known. "Good," she said. "Tell him I'm making the chicken." Nora looked at her mother standing in the kitchen of her ordinary apartment in the thin November light, alive and stubborn and completely herself, and felt the full weight of the past year settle into her. Not crushing, not lifting off either, just present, the way weight feels when you've been carrying it long enough that it becomes part of how you stand. "He'll be there at 7, she said. "Tell him 7:30, Ellen said. "I need to rest first. I just got out of the hospital." Nora said she'd tell him 7:30. She took out her phone and sent the message and stood in her mother's kitchen and looked out the window at the November street. Ordinary, cold. Ordinary. And for the first time in a year did not think about exits or camera angles or the position of people's hands or what their shoes said about whether they belonged in the room. She just looked at the street. And then she put her phone away and went to help her mother with the chicken, and the afternoon moved forward the way afternoons do when the worst is behind you, and what's in front of you is still uncertain but no longer threatening, just open. The specific and underrated openness of a day that has not yet decided what it will become.